I'm Sarah Bain. First, I want to start by thanking Allison and Mike for organizing this event. I hope that this is just the beginning, because the more often that we can do things like this, the more organically you'll just see that it creates quite a buzz when after you do sort of things like this, because everything's fresh. So Mike and Allison, if I could make a suggestion, I'd love for this to become a more regular thing. If perhaps we can help with the Zoom. We can take on some of that. So I for the last year have been working very closely with ALO and all of the companies that fall under the ALO platform. About a year ago, Ethical Capital Partners, which is a private equity firm, invested in and acquired ALO. Obviously, as you well know, one of the largest families of adult entertainment companies. One of the things that we said when we made the acquisition was, in the past, companies have been doing quite a lot of work to have a safer environment for both content creators, but also for users. But the world doesn't know that, because that's not what they think about when they think about online entertainment. And that's not why usually we're not interviewed for those topics. So one of the things that we said as a team was that we wanted to just at least be available to correct some of that misinformation, but also proactively get to the table so that when governments are thinking about writing legislation that's going to impact our industry, that at least we're consulted. So that's why events like this are important to us, because it's exactly what I do every day, which is media relations and government relations. So I hope that I can contribute a little bit to the session. So thanks, Allison and Mike, for having me.
Great. Lotus, do you want to sort of talk about, I'd love you to introduce yourself and sort of talk about your history in terms of advocacy and whether press or legislators?
Sure. Hi, I'm Lotus Lain, pronoun she, her, and I'm the industry advocate at Free Speech Coalition. I would say my history with advocacy started in maybe 2013 with Measure B type things. So really, that's when I found my voice in advocacy, because I realized at those meetings, from the response I got from the lawmakers at the time, the local lawmakers in LA, that they were like so amazed that I could speak clearly and coherently, and I chose this job of my own volition and all of this stuff that just seemed really basic. And that's when it kind of clicked in my mind, oh, they need to hear from us as humans, as individuals, to know that we're not trafficked, sad, forlorn cases that they make up these stereotypes in their minds. And really, that's what it's about, is kind of stereotype and myth busting when they see us in person advocating for what we actually want, rather than just accepting what they think that we want because they think we're sad and can't make decisions for ourselves.
Siouxsie, do you want to jump in on that and then give your...
Sure. Yeah. Similar. Thank you for saying that, Lotus. And it's so important that we are coming to the table, even when we're not offered a seat. We pull up our own chair and say, no, nothing about us without us. My advocacy journey is in my blood. Both my parents are, leftist hippie types. So I was, going to protests and union things at like 8 years old. I founded my high school's first gay straight alliance way back in the earliest 2000 literal one. But as a sex worker and an adult entertainer, I came down to Los Angeles to work for the Free Speech Coalition in 2016 to work on the No Prop 60 campaign, which, had we not defeated Prop 60, thanks to so many people who are in this room today, we would not have the landscape that we have now. There would be no OnlyFans. There would be no ability for workers to own the means of production and therefore have bargaining power in the environment that we see now. What we're facing now keeps me up at night in such a big way. We thought Prop 60 was bad. This is just as, if not worse. So I'm here I hope this is the beginning of a very active 6 to 9 months of what we're gonna do. We know, see, this is the thing, like Prop 6, our win, our defeat of Prop 60 really showed us that we have power here. We have so much influence, each of us. I mean, Lotus and I alone, as our little avatars within the adult entertainment industry, command so much more, eyeballs than your average citizen, right? And so our ability to use that influence to influence elections is real. We know it works. We won by kind of a landslide, and we know that's just in California, but the industry has grown so much because of OnlyFans, because of the pandemic. We have so many more people with skin in the game that we all have to have our voices out there. And we know the media can be our friend. Hi, friends. But we also know the media can really paint us in a bad light, especially when we don't use our voices to take that seat at the table and be part of the conversation. So I'm hoping that's what we can empower everybody in this room here to do today, to fight the fight that we are going into, because it's going to be a tough one, but we can do it. We got this.
And absolutely. Alana, do you want to introduce yourself quickly and sort of your background with press and media and legislators?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alana Evans. I'm president of APAG, the Adult Performance Artists Guild. We're a union for performers in the adult industry. We've been doing this since about 2016. Thankfully, working alongside FSC the last couple of years with legislative training. I myself have dealt with the press in many different aspects, not just for the union, for obviously my connections to the Donald Trump stuff. So just having them and having that correspondence with them has really helped. I think us teach the world that sex work is work, and I'm really excited to have all of us working together again. So hi, everyone.
Siri?
Hi, I'm Siri Dahl, and this is Gwen Adora, for those who don't know her. Gwen's staying at my house right now. Yeah, let's see. I've had a good amount of experience talking to especially mainstream media over the last several years, including, of course, the thing that kind of like avalanche rolled me into it all, which was the Nick Kristof New York Times piece. And then Gwen and I both were in the Pornhub documentary that came out on Netflix last year. And just because of the visibility that I've had around those projects, I've also, I feel like I'm one of the go-to people as like talent in the industry for mainstream like media and journalists who want snippets or whatever. So I do get reached out to fairly often. And that's about my experience. I've learned through some of my own trial and error and help from wonderful people like Mike, and also like Gustavo Turner, how best to navigate dealing with media and especially like vetting who I'm speaking to and knowing what the angle is on a piece when I am contacted for my input.
And Gwen? You and I first met on media because you were in other articles that I was in, and I was like, who is this smart, intelligent person? Do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I didn't expect to be on this today.
Don't feel pressure.
Happy to be here. Yeah, my name is Gwen Adora. I've been in the industry for like 6-7 years. And I've also done a lot of talking to journalists over the years as porn news has come out, not just about like kind of more like law government stuff, but also like changes to websites and things like that, those types of news beats. I typically have communicated with journalists a lot about that in the past. And also I'm just loud on Twitter, so get noticed by people. And yeah, also was in the documentary with Siri last year, just about my my vocalization about the Pornhub changes and just the legislations that have been implemented for that. I live in Canada as well, so I've also talked to like Canadian publications about specific Canadian laws and stuff that have been also kind of impacting adults like entertainment and companies up in Canada.
Great. Amazing. So because we've got a lot of people and we've got a lot of stuff to get through, what I'm going to do is maybe call on specific ones for specific issues and questions, because I really also want to make time for people to ask questions. A lot of people who sort of signed up for this had specific queries, and if we can get to them, I want to get to them as well. I have some resources and things to share that we can do as we sort of get a little bit further into it. I also going to have want to sort of put out a poll to talk about, like, just get a sense of how many people in the audience have spoken with legislators, how many people have spoken with journalists, to get a little of an idea of sort of the mood of or the experience of the audience. Before we start, I want to say a couple of things. One is, when you're dealing with legislators or when you're dealing with journalists, there is often, when I talk to creators or anybody in the industry or people outside of the industry, there's a lot of insecurity, right? Who is this person from the New York Times? Why are they contacting me? What are they going to think of me? Are they going to judge me? Am I going to seem smart? And the first thing I sort of want to say on all of this is that, having talked to these journalists for many times, having seen other people talk to them, you're the expert. They know. It doesn't matter where they went to school. It doesn't matter how long they've been doing it. They very rarely have as much insight into the industry and into your lives and into the effect of this as you do. So when you were going in there, I've gone with, Alana to Washington, to Siouxsie with Sacramento, Lotus, we've been Maxine Waters, right? We've sort of been doing all of this. But when you walk into those rooms, they are dealing with just the most basic knowledge and a lot of bad knowledge about you. So I want you to feel empowered when you go into these conversations and be like, you know what, I know more than they do. And I'm here to educate them, not to feel like you're going to get something wrong. You're also going to be speaking from your experience, and you don't need to necessarily know everything about Pornhub's moderation policies. That's for Sarah to know. And you don't need to know about every piece of legal litigation. You just need to know about how it affects your life and what you're scared of, right? There are ways, and we can get into them, a little bit about how to protect yourself to make sure that you're not sort of abused by journalists. But just in terms of going into that conversation, understand that, like, they are trying to get information from you, and you have that information. So don't worry about it. The other thing that I want to mention is that when you go into an interview, or when you specifically, think of it the way that you would go onto a set, right? There are boundaries. You can set up what you are comfortable talking about. You can set up how you're comfortable doing it. You can say, somebody approaches you and says, can I talk to you? Can you get on the phone? You can say, you know what, I would rather do this on email. You can say, hey, can I record this conversation? You can say, hey, I'm happy to talk to you, but only if your publication is going to use my stage name. I don't want my legal name, or I don't want to talk about this. And when you are in one of those conversations, you can also say, I'm not comfortable talking about that. There are other sort of more complex ways of navigating things, like on the record, off the record. But I think that in a general way, I just want people to understand that, like, you can control this. And I guess the final thing I would say is that, FSC and all of these people are resources. So if you do want to talk to a journalist, or if you get reached out by a journalist, or you're going to go talk to a legislator, feel free to email FSC, feel free to hit me up on Twitter, do all that, and we can walk you through and sort of help you feel a little more confident. This is what this should be. So that out of the way, I wanted to turn to Sarah. Sarah, you have been dealing with a lot of journalists and a lot of legislators. I wanted to sort of get a sense of, how do you reach out to journalists? Like, when you are like, I want to talk to somebody at the Business Insider or CNN or Vice or something, what's your sort of approach?
Thanks, Mike. I'll say it's so interesting that the way that you started off this by saying, like, you're the experts. Mike didn't say you're expert communicators. Like, that's not your jobs. That's Mike and Mai's job. So I'd say the first thing that I do when somebody says to me, like, you got to get a hold of a journalist, is I get an expert to reach out to a journalist, because it is work. Like, you've got to negotiate various things about the interview. So I actually, if I was the one who wanted to do the interview, I wouldn't be the first one to reach out to the journalist unless I already knew the journalist. Then you make it very informal. It's just, I want to chat with you. But if this is, an official outreach, I'd actually get, Mike, or call me or somebody else and say, like, I want a gut check. Is this person, what have they written about in the past? That you shouldn't be spending time figuring out, like, what do you think their pitch is going to be, or what's their beat, or, like, contact an expert. And, you certainly didn't, most of you didn't know me before today, but now you do. You certainly know Mike. Like, please don't hesitate to call somebody who does this every single day, because there's that expression, I didn't invent this, I stole it from someone else. It's like that idea of like, if you ask me to cut down a tree and you give me 6 hours, I'm going to spend half that time sharpening my axe. I got to get ready. Like, I got to know what I'm going to be doing. Who am I talking to? Is this on camera? When is this going to be aired? I want to know all of that before I get on, because I don't want to sort of get on and be like asking these awkward questions that I should already know everything about. And that was a really good point, Mike, that you made. Like, a lot of journalists will say to us, I have to have someone on the record. There are many people in our companies who do not want to be on the record because they know what has, like, they've seen other colleagues of theirs be attacked on social media afterwards, their home addresses be published. So there's a reason why a lot of people in our industry don't want to say what their names are. And you have to make that really, really clear from the beginning. But hard for you to do that, not hard for Mike and I to do it in advance on your behalf, right? So I'd say, in short, if you want to reach out to a journalist and you want to have like kind of be prepared and be strategic about it, give Mike or I a call first. We'll tell you any intel we've got on these journalists, and we can even do the outreach for you. Because then it sort of elevates you as, this is the spokesperson, not the coordinator.
Yep, that's a great point. And people do reach out to me and to FSC often to sort of say, hey, listen, I have this issue. Not only can you reach out to a journalist, but who would be a good journalist to reach out to? Because not everybody is going to respond to every issue, right? It's you're essentially, you reaching out to journalists doesn't mean they're going to write a story, and doesn't mean they're going to write a good story. You have to figure out how to do that. Siouxsie, maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of like how you sort of maybe craft a pitch, or like when you've been doing advocacy, what types of things, what strategies you use to get attention of a journalist.
Ooh, great question. So I one thing I didn't mention in my intro is I wrote for a publication. I had a column in the San Francisco Weekly for about 4.5 years called The Whore Next Door, which was very, it was a sex column, but you better believe I was using that as advocacy any chance I could get. If I got an assignment that was maybe like a fluff piece, which like a lot of times, your culture writers, your not political writers will want to cover the industry for something fluffy and fun. Like what's the craziest DM you've ever had in your OnlyFans is an opportunity to talk about how OnlyFans perhaps doesn't allow queer sex or anal, like all of the issues we have with these different forces that we interact with daily. So that's always a spoonful of sugar. That is the Siouxsie Q method by and large. So what is it Oscar Wilde that said, open their mouths with laughter and shove the truth in? People want us to be the sideshow. That we need to be very frank about the lineage of our industry. It comes from vaudeville, it comes from circus, we are the midway still. And so people want to gawk at us, people want to laugh at us. But when we can take that instinct for them and shove the truth of what the actual implications are, make people realize that this is the front lines of free speech. Adult entertainment is that. Once you get that off the table, once the government takes away your right to have adult entertainment, everything else is next, and we're seeing that domino fall. So that's definitely a strategy that I use. When I get approached, or if I want to approach a journalist about something, I'll maybe go for the fluffier folks who are, it's a slightly lower stakes. And then suddenly that fluff article turns into an article that has some real meat to it about the forces that we're dealing with as a community. And maybe a colleague from that publication says, oh, this is actually a human rights story. Oh, this is actually an election story. And it trickles on from there. But also, it's all relationships. So, maybe that journalist that reached out to you for a fluff story 6 months ago is on a different beat now. You keep that email, you follow her on Twitter and see what her beats are and what she's, concerned with. It's a really, on, I believe, I don't know if X still has this, but the ability to make lists of journalists that are covering this type of thing and keep tabs on them. So when you have something like the Prop 60 protest, you have a list of people that you can reach out to that are sort of a warm contact as opposed to a cold contact.
And yeah, I think that's so important because one of the things that is so important about following journalists is you get a sense of who they are, what they cover, and if they're fair, right? And interacting with them on Twitter can be a way to take away, I think, often when people from the porn industry reach out, it's like an alien reaching out, right? They've never dealt with it. They don't know what to expect. They don't know whether to giggle, they're going to be nervous. They don't know what questions to ask. And I think that having those interactions on social media, and sort of commenting on things can be a way to open that door a little bit, have them follow you back, see what your issues are, and things like that. Alana, you've done op-eds, right? You've reached out, you've had a lot of experience with media. When a journalist contacts you, right, and a lot of journalists have contacted you from things you posted on social. When a journalist contacts you, what is your process for preparing?
I trust no one, so I do my own research. I'm not the type of person to contact somebody and say, can you tell me who this person is? Because I trust no one. I mean, Mike and I know each other well. I know Mike. I don't know Sarah. She's new to us in that way. So I do my own research. I look into who they are. I look into the stories. I always check the publications because sometimes you will have journalists reach out to you that don't have an email address because maybe they're freelance. So I look up their names. I'll go to LinkedIn. But then I make sure that I'm absolutely familiar with what it is they want to talk to me about. If it's not something that's in my wheelhouse, I will pass them on to someone like Mike, or even someone like Siri, or, someone like Siouxsie Q, because I know where these people stand in their backgrounds and what they're comfortable with. And then inside, I know that I'm sending them to someone that I would be comfortable with. I'm not concerned about things that they might say because they're not prepared. But preparedness is definitely key. The main thing that I stick with when speaking to a journalist is they can only use what I personally give them. So I make sure that what I'm speaking to is fact. I don't make assumptions. I don't make guesses, especially because if information is out there and I'm saying something that's inaccurate, that's going to make me look bad. And I find it really important to be a good example for our community and our industry and to make sure I know what I'm talking about. And so if it's a circumstance where I don't, my ego does not get ahead of me, as it shouldn't for any of us. And I go to the people that understand. And I love Mike laughing, but it is true. Sometimes people in our industry are so interested in the attention of what is coming their way that they don't understand that they could pose a risk to the industry as a whole if their information is inaccurate.
And that's super important. I mean, I think one of the things that I've advised people in the past is journalists will try to get you to speculate. Why do you think this is? What are they doing? And I know that Siri, with the Christoph article, and then also obviously with Siri and Gwen with the Pornhub documentary, right? People want a quote that speaks broadly to things, and sometimes that can backfire. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of what, maybe Siri, start with your experience with Nick Christoph at the New York Times? He wrote the Children of Pornhub article, and Siri was one of the performers he talked to.
Yeah, I mean, well, he just cherry picked. Like, I had a really long phone conversation with him, and he didn't really use any of the information that I gave him. I mean, in fact, the only thing he quoted me on was like the one thing he asked. He was like, so thinking about ways, like solutions to get to like a place where like, the performers in your industry can keep using this resource that some of you need to live on. Like, he understood the gravity of like what I was telling him, how it affects us, like attacks on Pornhub like that. And even though I did my best to explain every single bit of it to him, at the end of toward the end of the phone call, he was like, so what do you think about these potential changes that people are asking Pornhub for? And I was like, it was like one of the things on the list. I think it was like verifying uploaders. I was like, well, that's really reasonable. And that was like the one thing he quoted me on. So it's just, of course, like,
It makes it look like you're co-signing the entire piece.
Yeah.
From that, and that is difficult. I know that a couple of you,
and that's the New York Times. I mean, it's an op-ed, but still, like, if that's the level of like care that their editorial department put into making sure that interviewees for that article were actually represented well, it's like that's just doesn't really bode well for any other publication either, which is why I also have more of an Alana approach personally, which is that like I just don't trust anyone. I would say the only minor exception to that is like certain journalists that I have had like years of rapport with, like where I know their beat, and like, and it doesn't mean I always like inherently trust them, but it's like, you know, there is at least an existing rapport there, and I generally know their approach. Like they have a really long history of like writing things that are intelligent. Like someone that I think of like that is like Sam Cole, who writes for like 404 Media now and was with Vice for a while. But yeah.
It's important. I mean, I think that to think about it as I think about like cocaine and a coke addict, right? Journalists, like when you're talking with I talk with friendly journalists. You know, many journalists will say to me that we're friendly with will sort of assume that we're talking off the record, you know, and meaning that it's not going to be for publication. It's just a chat. But if you give them something good, it's very irresistible for them, right? And so every once in a while, you know, you if you let your guard down, you say something, you speak frankly, you speculate, you say something, you know, that's on the record, right? Even if it's a DM, even if it's a text message, even if it's just sort of the intro to a phone call before they say, hey, we're recording this, that can be used against you. And like, again, even the best, the people who want to do the best, if you accidentally give them something that they can't resist using, like, you know, you can sort of be disposable. I know there's a couple of you, I want to sort of ask a quick question. How many of you record interviews or otherwise take notes? Yeah, I mean, does anybody, I mean, Sarah, I know maybe you want to talk about your strategy about keeping journalists from misquoting you.
Yeah, I'll just start. I too do not trust journalists, but I absolutely trust you know, the people who I work with, and I absolutely trust Mike. So I'm going to work all of you. I'm very new to all of you, so you know, I please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I can put my email into the chat, but if not me, reach out to Mike. But on the recording thing, so I actually extend that, Mike. We did talk about government as well at the beginning of this call. I record all of my conversations. I'm not recording this conversation because Mike already told me it was recorded. But you should actually know the law in where you are before you do that, though. So with a journalist, the general rule is if they pull out a recorder, then that is an acceptance that this conversation is recorded, and therefore you can record it. But even my conversations with government, which in Canada, and again, I'm going to repeat this, it is up to you to either look into, do your own research, as Alana said, or contact Mike and I to find out what the rules are. In Canada, anywhere you are, you can record a conversation. This is a very odd rule, as long as one person in the conversation knows it, including you. So you can record a conversation. I, you know, recently went to a meeting with an elected official who some of you may have heard of because she's sponsoring a bill in Canada, maybe Deschamps. I recorded the conversation because you know, it wasn't because I wanted to be malicious or ever use it. I wanted to know what I said. I wanted to make sure that if afterward, if anything ever came up, I wanted to know. And when you're in the heat of an interview or a conversation, sometimes you actually completely forget what you said because you're not acting, but like you're playing a role in that you're being quoted. So sometimes I forget what I said and I just want to know. So I do record, but that's really only for my personal use.
But you can also use it. I mean, I have definitely used recordings or notes or help people who've done it to say if you're misquoted, right? So to be able to say, you know, I didn't actually say that. And there are ways in which you can, even if you haven't recorded it, if they've misquoted you, where you can write to them, or you can write to their editor, you can get us involved and say, hey, listen, this is actually a misquote. I don't believe that. Because if they don't have that recording, you know, where they're proving they're saying it, like most, you know, often they will revisit it, right? They will do an edit. The damage may be already done, but that is a tool that you have. Alana, I see you nodding on that.
And I private message. I wanted to share with everyone what happened to me with the Donald Trump thing very briefly. In 2016, I was doing an interview with Aurora Snow, and we were talking about Charlie Sheen. Aurora lives in a separate state and had recorded our entire conversation without mentioning it to me. No big deal at the time. But then years later, during that conversation, I told Aurora my story about being in Tahoe with Stormy about Donald Trump. Well, it was recorded. So years later, without asking me, and with a 5-minute phone call, the story going live, Aurora had realized that she had that piece recorded, and they gave it to their editors. And that's how all of that started, simply in a conversation I was having with a friend. So you also have to keep in mind that anything that you say to them, even if it is someone that you're friendly with and they're recording it, could literally be used in any circumstance years later. So I just wanted to share that.
It's important. I think that, again, always assume that you're on record, always assume that if you're talking to a journalist that is something that can be used. Don't let your guard down, right? I mean, you can be friendly, you can be casual, but in future things we can sort of get into how to navigate on the record and off the record and all of that. That has its own risks, and so I want to spend time doing that carefully and not casually. And I do want to say also, one of the things I would mention, because I want to get into the legislative stuff too, because I know that that's a lot of what's happening. I want to get to questions. Is that, the best thing that I can do after I finish an interview, I've given my quotes, is to follow up with information. So you're going to be talking about a lot of things. Oh, this thing that happened in Utah, or this thing that happened this, or this banking discrimination that happened to this performer. Send them links. Reach out to people who also can speak to that, maybe stories that you've told, see if they're open to talk to it. Like, provide the resource. Journalists are running on deadlines. They are overstretched. They don't know the terrain. And so whoever gives them the information is going to dominate the article. And if you have an anti-porn group or someone who's got your bad, got it out for you, and they're providing all the information, well, the journalists, that's easy, right? It's all been delivered to them. They don't have to Google. They don't have to do research. Google News is terrible. You can't always find this stuff. So if you're referring to things, follow up with an email. Give them all of that. Let them know. Say, hey, listen, if there was anything that was confusing, come back to me and ask, right? Because if someone makes another claim, I want to be asked. You can make all that. Doesn't mean journalists are going to include it. Doesn't mean that they're going to listen to you, but it increases that a lot more. So I want to talk a little bit about legislators and dealing with legislative work, because that is so much of what's happening right now. Lotus, a few months ago, we went down and spoke to Maxine Waters at one of her town halls. You spoke very eloquently about sort of banking discrimination and sex work. I want to and you're also someone who obviously was intimately involved in, like Prop 60 and campaigns, and FSC have been very vocal. I'm curious as to how, and you were also recently UN in Switzerland, right? Speaking to the Human Rights Committee. How do you prepare when you're going into speak, whether publicly or privately, with a legislator? Even emotionally, how do you sort of prep yourself? What are the things that go into your mind?
Emotionally, wow, that's deep. I definitely,
what is it for people who've not done this?
Yeah, no, it can be emotional. It can be overwhelming,
so
because you feel maybe a little sense of an imposter syndrome, or maybe you feel like, what am I doing here? But like Mike said earlier, we are the experts in our industry of how the ins and outs of the day-to-day of an adult industry content creator is. They don't know anything. So when we go there, have that confidence that you know what you're talking about, because you know your life, you know your lifestyle, you know the life and lifestyle of your colleagues and the people you collaborate with. So first, step into that power. Definitely breathing exercises help before you're about to speak. And try not to rush it, because this is, for a lot of those legislators, people's first times hearing these concepts, hearing this information. It's going to be a lot, and it's going to be overwhelming for them too, because they really are digesting this for the first time and shattering these stereotypes right there as you're speaking. And I'm sure many of us that have spoken to legislators have seen those mind-blowing moments in their face, as they're reacting, as they're really taking this in, whoa, I never thought of these things. I never heard of this. I didn't know this was happening. I didn't know you people existed in this much abundance and did all this and have lives like this. So you really have to know that you know what you're talking about, and give yourself the grace to not be perfect when you go up and speak, because we're human, so it doesn't have to be this perfect moment where you deliver like a mic drop moment. Maybe the conversation is spoken to the legislator after, and it's more one-on-one, and that's easier for you to have your points gotten across. But definitely, speaking of getting your points across, in preparation, I always kind of look over what it is that I want to say, so that way I'm not fumbling as much. So that way I hit him with 1, 2, 3 points A, B, and C, and that's what sticks in their head.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think also, you know, obviously if you are super nervous and want to, you know, and you're doing a public statement, you know, you can obviously read from a script. I think that what I always advise people is that, you know, speak from your heart, right? It doesn't have to be everything. You know, when you're dealing with the legislature, you can always follow up with a letter. You can always follow up with all of those things. But having that sort of more casual, like, hey, this is me, this is who I am, this is why I oppose this bill, this is what I'm scared of. Again, you may not get it all right, you may not get it all out, but that is such an important way of communicating, as Lotus says, right, that you're a human, right? Because I think a lot of people, they look at it and it's like SpongeBob just came off the screen and has walked into the room. And in some ways, obviously what you're saying is important, and that you are like, your message is important, but it's also something that they're seeing that you're a real person. And that is what, like, you know, I think that Lotus is speaking, right? Their head is blown because they're like, oh, you know what you're not talking about. I remember, you know, and you're not whatever the stereotype is. Or if you're the stereotype, you also can speak to these issues, right? You're more
Right.
than just what
You
is
can be
on.
boobylicious and brainylicious.
I remember we went to Sacramento for Prop 60 or one of those battles, and the legislator asked one of the performances there, how do I know you're not being paid to be here? And she just sort of laughed and she said, you know, looking around, because I was probably there and, you know, the legislators were there, and there was a lobbyist there. And she was like, I'm the only one who's not being paid to be here, right? But you're like, because that was Lorelei Lee, you know, like, you know, I'm the one who is here voluntarily, but you're assuming that my voice is discounted. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
You know,
and just real quick, you are gonna be nervous for your first time speaking publicly. I remember now, when I spoke at the May Day march on behalf of ACLU, one of the first sex workers chosen to speak there. I had a thing written up, like Mike gave me talking points, and then I, you know, wrote it into a speech, and I was literally reading off of a piece of paper at a speech. Now I don't have to do that, but don't feel afraid if that's the first thing that you have to rely on, because you're not going to be perfect your first few times out. It does take practice, and it does take getting over that and getting the confidence in yourself once you get that reaction, that positive reaction of people just accepting and hearing what you have to say.
absolutely, absolutely. Alana, you were in DC with us more recently, sort of about banking discrimination. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your experience was dealing with legislators, like walking into, you know, the halls of Congress, you walk into like the legislator's office, you know, what that is like, and how you stay on message?
Thank you. Definitely, Mike. I think Lotus used a really good word when she says overwhelming. Walking into such prestigious buildings can initially kind of feel like a field trip. You might feel a little out of place. You might feel a little awkward. You're taking in everything, but it's exciting. And the feeling of wholeness that I felt being there, knowing that we're being given this opportunity, you can allow that to take over. And for me, I find excitement more than nerves drive me in a lot of these ways. But I also learned that, again, as Lotus was saying, we are new to them. Many of these people that we spoke to, whether it was staff of, you know, congressmen or senators, this is their first time talking to anyone like this. And there were a group of us, and we each kind of represented a different facet of the industry. And having that type of information in our packages as people can really help open that door with them. And so having them actually listen, feeling that we were being heard was one of the most amazing things I felt in my life. But something that I also found very curious and taught me instantly to keep an open mind when speaking to legislators is that some of the people that listened to us the most and shockingly were so receptive were Republicans. And I myself, as a Democrat, I obviously have my own party choice, wasn't going to, I didn't expect that type of reaction from them. So it was really important for me to recognize, to have an open mind, regardless of where people may stand on politically or passionately. There's still an opportunity to get through to the people that we're speaking with if you're comfortable, if you're passionate, but don't let you we all have voices in our head, you know, that want to create a future for us. And it's important to stay in the moment. Again, as Lotus said, breathing exercises, taking that time for yourself so that you can compose yourself. But the experience was absolutely incredible. And to anyone that might have that opportunity, don't let it scare you away from doing it. It's going to be something that you know, are very happy that you did. As I mentioned, that wholeness that you feel inside, because we are all here fighting for each one of us as an industry. And it's something really amazing to be a part of. So, you know, we're always encouraging more people to join us.
And those arguments that you make, I think that one of the things when we have been to DC, or when we've made, you know, arguments even in Sacramento, right, is that they may not agree with us as an industry, right? They may have moral objections, but there are ideological issues that they agree on, right? So Republicans, when we're dealing with banking discrimination, may feel like, okay, you know, big banks are bad and they're discriminating against gun manufacturers. So we're going to talk about that in their language. Like, you want to sort of talk about the issues as they matter to them. You don't want to go in, you know, and just smash into that wave and try to fight them on everything. You want to figure out where there is commonality, and you know, and figure out like what issues you share and talk to that. Like, and that's the same if you're dealing with someone online, as you know, we're dealing with families, to figure out like, oh, is freedom important to you? You know, is like big government a concern? Well, this is how this fits into this. And I think that like always trying to find those puzzle pieces that will make that match. I want to go to questions in just 1 second. So if there are people who have questions on any of this or anything else, put them in the chat and we'll get to them. I want to talk a little bit about dealing with pushback, right? And Sarah, you know, obviously you have watched with ALO and Pornhub and legislators really coming and grilling you and you know, maybe sometimes being hostile. How do you manage that type of I mean, it'd be like, it can feel like a slap on the face. You know, I mean, it can be very shocking and emotional. So I'm curious as to how, you know, in very tough situations, you navigate some of that.
So I'll go back to saying, I actually rarely have found that in an interview, the journalist is being hostile, because I've done a pre-interview. So you know, you were saying stuff about on and off the record, like either myself or my colleagues will have done a pre-recording, a pre-interview, sorry, so that we understand exactly what, I don't need to know what the questions are. And sometimes that's offensive to a journalist where you say, like, I want to know the exact questions. That's not what we ask for, but we just make sure that we're very prepared so that when we're going into the interview, the journalist already has a sense of sort of what the parameters are. But in that case, if I do get a question that I just, you know, I'm fearful of, or like, and we really try so hard to be prepared for any scenario. But the idea here is that's when I sort of like back on to like who I am as a person. Like I like lean really heavy into the fact that like, if this is offending me, like I'll either like kind of cringe or back up. And sometimes I'll like, those words will actually come out of my mouth. Like, you know, something along the lines of like, did you ask my male colleagues the same question? Because, you know, at ECP, I'm the only female in the group. And so I've, you know, if they ask me a question that I feel like this just doesn't feel right, sometimes like I can't help myself, I'll just say it. Like, if you were doing this interview with someone else, would you have asked them this question? It just, you know, and sort of make them become human beings again. Like sometimes journalists, just like anyone, when you're in like a confrontation, you lose yourself, like the journalist, not me here, like they lose themselves. And so sometimes that tactic of just like being honest about the fact that I don't feel comfortable with that question. And then if that's what they decide to write, Sarah Bain didn't feel comfortable, I think that reflects far more on the journalist than it does on me. So I'll say again, back on like, I think you need to be really, really prepared because it's not in a live interview that you want to be surprised by a question like that. And then the final thing is I think I can't help but not be a human when like I feel attacked. So let yourself be attacked, because if the worst thing they write was that like, you know, Sarah Bain became erratic and she was crazy, I'll be like, yeah, I like, and I like, and I'm more than happy to then, I saw a question about like getting a quote corrected. I will be more than happy to go back to the editor and say like, this is inappropriate for the journalist to have behaved this way. So there's a lot of tactics that you can use. And again, if you don't feel comfortable using those tactics, then have, you know, someone else pull the snake out of the bag for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So one last thing in terms of like, obviously a lot of you are really vocal on social media. Siri and Gwen, since I've got you guys here as well, like you've been very active. You've been a lot of questions that came up during the sign up process were, you know, can I do this on social? Is this going to cause me to lose my account? Obviously, you guys have had risks for speaking out. But more than that, I want to sort of understand a little bit like how you navigate that with fans, right? How you navigate that sort of pushback, because you do have big platforms, you do have a big voice. What is that like? What's your strategy? How do you handle it?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, when I first started my, like, specifically, I guess, like X or Twitter is kind of the spot to really speak about that, just because you can write things. When I first started it, I think it was just kind of like, perhaps just like my moral compass was like, I just kind of need to be speaking about this stuff from the get-go. But I can imagine for someone who isn't used to that, being like, hey, like, let's show a little bit more of like my feelings and opinions on things, especially stuff that affects our work directly. But I think a lot of people are getting more comfortable with that, which is exciting to me. Like a lot of like, I would say like OnlyFans people who kind of blew up in the pandemic, who like are pretty like kind of mainstream energy from them in terms of like not being connected perhaps to like niche communities. I've seen even like those types of people like really speak out about like changes that are affecting like the adult industry like at large, which they aren't necessarily directly a part of. But I think like realizing that you can be honest with people about like the changes that are affecting your work, because like at the end of the day, if like we can't make porn anymore, the fans aren't gonna like that either. So it's like to let them know too that you're like, hey, like I'm a human. I'm not just like a little avatar that you see every day when you log in. Like you can care about this too. And I think that really like it really helps our cause when our fans care about what we're talking about. So yeah, don't be afraid to like break out and kind of give some more personality too. Like you're like, oh, like this person actually stands for something, on top of like making awesome content.
I know you're not AI.
Yeah,
right?
you're definitely not AI. And
Like,
also,
you're not a bot, you're not a chat team, you're not a paid social, like that's you, and like
That's
that does
very
sort of
obvious.
stand out.
And also I think like one of the benefits I've seen is like whenever I tweet about like any kind of like more serious issue, I get a lot of engagement from other sex workers, because we all care about that. And like that engagement too is also like, I would say like equally as great for like you know, like my Twitter account than like me posting a nude, for example. Like a lot of my text tweets, the sexy ones don't get as much interactions as my political ones, just because like the sex workers are there showing up, and they're showing that with their fans. And like I think there's like, I've never seen a downside personally, other than maybe like alienating a couple people, but it's like, why would I want those people if they don't care about this? Like I don't really need them supporting my work.
Amazing. Yeah, I think absolutely. I just want to give a quick note that a lot of people who were signing up for this also had issues about how to ask certain questions or how to talk about things. I sort of put together some resources in a doc. It's sort of specifically on age verification, you know, and some of the issues that come up in the chat. You can download it. You know, it sort of talks about like what we face when we go in to talk about this as an issue. If it makes you a little bit more comfortable understanding, you know, some of the questions. There's, you know, sort of FSC's age verification tracker. There's Woodhull's sort of porn myths and other stuff in there that may be helpful. One thing that I see Allie sort of putting in the comments, right, is that how do I reach out to a legislator? right? How do I begin the process? FSC has tools for that, right? We have a website, Defend Online Privacy, which allows you to sort of reach a legislator in your state, that is passing some of this legislation or looking at it. But Siouxsie, maybe you could talk a little bit about like what that process is like when you do the reach out, right? How do you advocate for yourself? Like, what are the different avenues that people can use? Like, because not everybody's going to show up in an office like Alana or in a town hall like this.
So social media is great because it's public, right? You can tweet at these people. They know that that matters. You definitely have more followers than every single legislator in your county. I know that. So that engagement is important. Of course, there is an intersection between like journalism and legislation, right? So like you can say, if you've tried and you're hitting a wall with a certain legislator, maybe somebody at a paper wants to hear about that. That they're really not listening to certain constituents based on their identities. That's not pretty cute, is it? So there's that. There's also calling, and never forget a fax machine. Fax machines are still in legislators' offices, at least for now, right? So I can't remember which thing we did this for, but we put together an action. So you can call and the phone lines will get clogged up and the message machines will get full. And so you reach, a point where you can't really get through unless you show up. But you can send a fax, and those faxes come through and they get printed and they take up space in the office and they say specific things. And that's a way that you can sometimes get through and clog up their offices and make them listen to you. I also firmly believe
online, you don't have to have a fax machine.
Yeah, you don't have to and we can follow up. If you Google like, how do I send a fax from an email? It's very easy to do. So follow up with me directly on Twitter, Instagram. I'm very happy to harass our legislators in that respect again and again until it's over.
Everyone put their social media in this handle. People keep asking for it, and I keep meaning to interrupt. But yes, sorry, Siouxsie.
Yes, I'm Siouxsie Q Media on X and on Instagram.
Allison just did it for everyone.
Oh, Allison.
Thank you, Allison. We love you. So back in 2018, when Sesta Fosta was passed, it was a little too late, but in different jurisdictions all around the country, we had a coordinated effort of not just one, not just two, but groups of people going into these offices and holding legislators accountable who had voted for this piece of legislation that essentially criminalized speech about sex on the internet, which the ramifications we're still seeing today, right? So if you're not by yourself, get a group together, do a coordinated effort. And if you can't make an appointment with these folks, if you're calling and you're not, oh, I'm sorry, there are no appointments, they're going to have to go into that office eventually. You can be there, find the office hours, camp out, show up, have something to leave behind. Like we've made pamphlets in the past, but even if it's just a written letter that you have typed yourself and printed out, said, hello, I am one of your constituents. Whether you get elected next year or not matters to me. Here's how many followers I have, and I need you to listen to me. And don't be afraid to talk to a staffer. Sometimes you'll only get a staffer, but that staffer is in that office every single day. If you change that staffer's mind and the other staffer's mind, and then ask for a follow-up with that exact legislator, it can happen. It starts with individual people, and no matter what their position and rank is, it matters. And bit by bit, you can chip away, change hearts and minds. And I just want to say again, to Alana's point, connecting with people's humanity, it's not as hard as we think. You may not believe in my right to show my butthole on the internet, but you do believe in my right to safety, privacy, and being an American, the things that the Constitution promises, right? So especially with Republicans, never forget that the California Republican Party was the first to sign on against no Prop 60 before the Democrats. So don't think that because someone ideologically may not perfectly match up with you, that you can't connect with like, hey, families deserve to be safe, right? Like people deserve to be free, right? And then once you get there, you can say, okay, so we both agree on that. Now let's talk about this other thing. So.
And it may just be like, we don't like the government doing anything, so we don't want them regulating this as well. We may want to ban you. It's sort of some of the legislation.
But no, yeah, definitely. I just want to say, meet them on common ground tactics, not on the attack tactics.
Exactly.
Because they will never respond positively to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, to your point earlier, Lotus, about having nerves, let your nerves be your superpower. Like, they expect us to come in and be like, I was trafficked, it is horrible. And
Yeah.
if you come in and say, like, I am nervous, I am scared because the legislation that you are backing currently in your committee would take away my ability to provide for my child and my family. That's why I'm scared. And I am a victim, but it's your fault. That's tough, tough to hear.
Yeah. And it's a volume game too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people get nervous when they say, oh, call your legislator, call your legislator. You think that, like, you're going to pick up and it's going to be your parent yelling back at you. Most of the time, it is just somebody picking up being like, you're like, I oppose this bill. And they're like, okay, thank you. And they're writing it down. But that sort of, those notes, whether it's a fax, whether it's a visit, all of them count tremendously, right? Somebody took this, this was taking a constituent and making them do something that thousands of other people aren't doing anything about. So it sort of has, you know, we all vote and that's great. But if you call a legislator, it counts 10 times as much because they're like, oh, this person is pissed about that. They're a constituent. They're definitely going to vote on this and they're going to remember. And most people are sheep, but they're not paying attention to anything. So what do we care? Speaking up in any way, sending an email, sending a tweet, calling, showing up at an office, doing some organized stuff with FSC, you know, is, you know, they're all sort of on a scale, but start small, get comfortable, and then, you know, you'll be like pros like these people on this panel, able to walk into anything and be like, yeah, it's fine. We're
At the end of the day, these people just want to get reelected too. So you got to understand, like, what matters to them, their job. And so at the end of the day, you're their boss.
Yeah. So we are going to, it's noon and I want to be respectful of people's time. As Sarah mentioned in the beginning, right? This is the beginning of a longer process. This was sort of a broad overview of some of these things. We're going to get into some questions about, you know, in the future, really about sort of like, hey, listen, we're going to do an advocacy campaign. We need you all to sort of reach out to legislators. Here's how you do it. We may do one that's more specific to like dealing with or reaching out to journalists, getting an op-ed, you know, as so many people on this panel have done, right? How do I do this? How do I approach it? We'll do things in a little bit bite-sized. What I wanted to do here was make people feel like, oh, this is not an impossibility. I can get in here. I can have a difference. We have won so many battles with so little that it's shocking. And so I want everyone to feel like, yes, I am engaged. We will follow up. I've got all of your emails. I've got all the specifics that you mentioned in terms of like what you want to do and doing online social media campaigns and all of that. So thank you to all the wonderful panelists who have been here. This is beyond all of my wildest dreams as to how great it could be. And we will talk very soon. We'll be in touch. And this will be recorded too, so you can share it.
Before we go, I have to say, Google Project 2025, conservatives are trying to literally throw us in jail. It is not casual. It is not pretend. We have to fight really hard in this coming election. I will be harassing all of you to do voter rights campaigns and do the thing. So that's all. Project 2025, look it up. Page 5 is where it gets really gnarly. That's all. Thanks.
Bye, guys. Thank you.